Hello, and welcome to Open Stutter and another episode of Coffee with Vivian and Sara. I'm Vivian Siskin,
And I'm Sarah McIntyre.
and we're here to talk about stuttering, arts, and coffee.
And coffee. Yeah.
Coffee, Sarah. Let's talk about coffee first. What do you got there?
Okay. So I made myself a cappuccino that has a semblance of a leaf still, which is great. But I used special coffee today. So I used Broad Porch coffee, which Jay Dedman and Ryan were so gracious to send me, and they help produce and make the open stutter videos happen. And we're kind of at the origin, as you had shared, of nudging you to create open stutter. And so little plug, but also excellent coffee too. So thank you, Jay and Ryan.
Yeah, and if you're ever in the Luray, Virginia area, and they have another one, I think is in Harrisonburg, Virginia, but stop into their coffee shop. It's amazing and wonderful. And maybe even Jay or Ryan will be there to say hello to you. So I'm sort of new at being a barista here and learning how to do this stuff. And in fact, the last time that Jay and Ryan sent me coffee, it was ground because I wasn't doing my barista thing yet. I was still doing my French press with the ground coffee. But today, so I'm going to share my.
Ooh, I should have done the
Ooh,
same.
you go ahead and do
Pretty
it,
good.
Sarah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's see.
is yours
Mine,
still left?
it's
Yeah.
not super good anymore. Good.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Super. Wow.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're here caffeinated and ready to go, with more caffeine ready to go anytime. And what's our topic for today? So, Sarah, I decided to ask my Saturday morning group what they thought would be a good topic for us to talk about in our next episode. And several of them agreed, and I'll tell you why they agreed. They were their clients in our Saturday morning group, arts group, but several of them serve as mentors for our arts trainings. And so they're there as people who have gone through the therapy, and they're giving their perspective, sharing their journeys, and helping speech language therapists understand arts and how to apply it for their own clients. And they were saying that in their breakout groups, they were getting a lot of questions from speech therapists about buy-in to arts. I love the word. You know, I hate the word,
I know.
but
I was going to say your favorite topic.
buy-in to arts, um, and asking them how they bought in and those kinds of things. Um, and so my answer to that is always, we're not selling anything, so there's no buy-in. But it's very interesting that speech therapists are very worried about how to present stutter-affirming therapy to their clients who may be hoping or wishing or preferring more fluency-based approaches. So I thought it was an interesting topic that we talk about buy-in. And I'll be honest with you, people have asked me about it. So I want your take on it, because in our groups, we don't have a lot of initial buy-in questions. People who come to group have already been exposed to maybe our consults where they learn about it. And I have a lot of ideas on why we don't have a lot of buy-in issues. But we can talk about this later. They kind of like revert or recycle buy-in issues later in their journey.
Mhm.
So I think it's an interesting, at the beginning, no, and then when they get deep into it, maybe reevaluating some of their values and things like that. Um, does it come up for you very much?
I think I think so, but I think so in different ways depending on the person's experience to stuttering therapy prior, whether what role they are, in terms of the person who stutters versus parent. I think that can be a little bit of a different experience, but I think for people who stutter, in my experience, buy-in isn't so tricky when you explain the paradoxical nature of stuttering and kind of help them explore struggle and change and compare and contrast it maybe to some of their previous their therapy approaches, because there's a reason they're trying something different. And so I
Yeah.
think at that juncture, those are some really important topics to meet them at the onset with that support that.
So you mentioned something kind of interesting. Maybe it could be different for parents and for adult clients or maybe kids and things like that. Um, so if they're ready to try something different, that would make sense for maybe a teen or an adult client, someone who stutters. What is your experience with parents?
I think it's unique and individual depending on how they're thinking about things, what some of their worries are, what some of their hopes are for the young person in their life. But I think that this buy-in experience is a little bit trickier for parents of young children, because it's not the necessarily intuitive viewpoint in how they're coming to the consult or how they're coming from their previous experience with stuttering therapy to you and expecting. And ultimately they want life and stuttering and communication and all those things to be easier. They want their kids to be confident and to joyfully communicate. But the route to get there, I think that they assume maybe looks a little bit different than the route that we might take. And so I do find that that is a conversation to navigate. I'd love your perspective on that too. Is
Yeah.
that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think, I would have to, like you went directly to the young children. Yeah. When I
Mhm,
think about young children, no, I don't think that would be the first conversation, obviously. I'm thinking school age children where, and older, where parents have been with them on the journey, sometimes through several speech therapies that have not been helpful. And now they're kind of open to something that might be helpful. And so that's one type of situation where, yeah, this my child has been in speech therapy for 3 years with no change. I mean, that is a sad and unfortunately not uncommon situation, or perhaps getting worse, as I hear from some parents. But around, with newly diagnosed children or children near onset, I think they're coming in with, my child is young, early intervention is helpful for so many things. What are the options here? Can early intervention fix my child? Can early intervention help move my child out of stuttering and into the category of I used to stutter kind of thing? And so I think the conversation is much more related to um, what can I do now to establish a home environment that sort of works on both. If we, like you wanted, like play both sides of it. So what can we do to affirm self-confidence if the child will resolve? And what can we do that will ensure self-confidence and comfort if the child does not resolve?
mhm,
And so I think that we're playing both of those things and navigating very carefully at the preschool level, for good reasons, because we can't assume that they will need to affirm stuttering their whole life.
mhm,
But I always think maybe they won't, but if you affirm something that they're doing now, what's the downside, really? What's the downside of affirming something that's going on right now, especially if not affirming it will increase struggle?
mhm,
So that's sort of the way I look at that. The other thing that I just thought about that is um, important to me. So I hear a lot from speech therapists when I go to conferences or I hear people talk about what they do with various clients. And they say, I talk to the client, family, and I let them decide what they want. In other words, I give them options. There's fluency enhancing, and then there's management, and then there's stuttering affirming therapy, and try to find out what the client wants. And let's, for argument's sake, let's say it's an adult client right now. Although I can make the same argument for parents as well. Um, and I think that it's almost like, I'm trying to think of an analogy, but um, it's it's offering it's making them make basically a false choice, if you know what I'm talking about. And what I mean by a false choice is that you're making them choose between an acceptance approach or a fluency-based approach. And they're very different, because acceptance-based approach is you are embracing the moment of stuttering and not trying to suppress it. And reinforcement from the clinician is going to be about comfort and connection and spontaneity and living with it well. While on the other hand, the only way that a fluency program can be, the only response you can have from a reinforcement perspective is, great, I didn't hear any stuttering. Good job, that was very fluent. And for me, the false choice is that you can't make a choice between acceptance and fluency, because the fluency choice is not a real choice. You can't choose fluency. I would go for that choice if it were an option. It's not chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream. It's like chocolate ice cream or ice cream that's already melted. It's not going to stay. It's not going to stay. It'll last. Ice cream already melted. I'm having a bad analogy, but whatever. It's something that's not going to hold up. And so I think that if you say, yeah, of course I want fluency. I mean, very few people would say, accept this, what I know, which is very difficult to live with, creating a lot of anxiety, exhaustion, and and feeling not good about myself and not showing up for things. That, or in other words, just suck it up and accept it, or fluency. Of course I want fluency. Who would say they don't? But what they're choosing is, once they work on fluency, they would have sort of a, what we call a flight into health, where maybe they will have more fluent speech for a while. But the more you try to hold up that fluency, the more concealment comes in, suppression comes in, hiding comes in, escape comes in. And once those start kicking in, you're back to the struggle. So it's not a real choice. The fluency choice is not a real choice. It's a false choice. And so for me, I having a discussion on what do you want is not the best way to begin for me. I think for me, the best way to begin is talking about why they're seeking help. And I know you agree with me 100%, because I know you do the exact same thing. Preaching to the choir here, but the idea is that uh, what is it that you're looking for? And generally people start talking to me about their exhaustion, or their feelings of inauthenticity, or their tension and struggle, or not liking the feeling of stuttering in front of others. In other words, any shame or embarrassment, or worrying about what other people think. In other words, this is stuttering, right? This is the life impact of stuttering, struggle. And they usually start talking about the struggle, whether it be physical struggle, emotional struggle, or mental gymnastics. They begin to talk about that struggle. And for me, it's a natural progression to say, it sounds like you're struggling with this. It sounds like you're struggling with this. What would it be like if you could let go of some of that struggle? And then they on their own begin to talk about the outcomes that they want. And I never really have to say, do you want acceptance or do you want fluency? Because it's not, those aren't the choices. I guess I've been talking a long time, but that, to me, that false choice is the fallacy in when speech therapists say, I offer all these approaches to my clients and let them choose the one they want, like it's a buffet table. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. I think one of the elements of arts that resonates with me is that it just because we're not pursuing fluency in that in the direct seeking manner doesn't mean we're not supporting change to how someone stutters.
Mhm.
And I think that that is an important piece that I know I've learned from you so much in and within my own journey was really important, that of course I want to feel better and more confident and comfortable with who I am, but I also want the moment of stuttering to feel easier. And I think ultimately that's what so many people come to, but it's the route that we take. And I think the buy-in factor gets tricky if the route isn't um, either elicited from them through guiding questions on their own of what changes they'd like to see, and then what would it be like to let go of some of those things, or if it's more kind of describing some of the underlying foundations of arts and understanding the approach avoidance conflict, and understanding how struggle maintains and perpetuates, and then what letting go might look like. I think if I'm hearing when I'm talking to a parent or an individual who stutters a little bit of a, I'm not sure, I think checking in a little bit on what it is that they're hoping for, and finding a way in to support a connection to empowering, and and kind of looking for the word, like confirming that change is the direction we're going to. It's just might look a little different than what you might have thought.
Yeah. So one of the comments I get very often in my groups is that, people in the groups, there are people who have more covert profiles and people who have more overt profiles. And of course, they'll say, well, yeah, you're a covert person, so you're an overt person. So yeah, that's easier. Everybody thinks the grass is always greener, right? So I'm really curious about as a covert stutterer, when you first began this journey into acceptance-based therapy, stutter-affirming therapy, when it's so, for a covert person, it's like, even though you're interested in letting go of the struggle and becoming more authentic, in that moment of crunch that you could just do a quick little avoidance behavior that you've tried so hard to get rid of. But that in that moment, like, just once, I'll just use a different word, or I'll put in an or I'll do, a roll.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have trouble with that profile, as a covert profile, struggling with the buy-in, even after you've decided to get into the journey?
Yeah. I was really green in terms of what stuttering therapy looked like when I sought out stuttering therapy at 22. So I didn't have a lot of experience before that. And so I was experiencing all the options sort of at once. And what I wanted was to not feel the pain and burden of concealment that I knew was weighing on me, was resulting in a number of stress induced kind of physical experiences for me and mentally and all those things. But I also really didn't want to stutter either. And I was looking for a way to resolve the internal burden and angst and shame I felt. But I was not I was not interested in being someone who was open as someone who stutters, because I didn't really know what I didn't know, and I didn't know what the path looked like yet. So I did experience, a number of different potential ways or approaches or directions, and I felt like there was a little bit of a variably helpful piece to what it was that I was utilizing to attempt more control. I mean, in hindsight, I was like already exerting the utmost control on my own in maintaining stuttering to be under the surface by my own developed coping techniques and tools. But I was giving it my all in terms of some of the more traditional things that I was learning. But I was so curious about the variability of them, quote, working, and the variability of my internal and external struggle response to, and the shame and embarrassment I felt, and simultaneously working on things that were in alignment with a more acceptance-based approach, like self-disclosure and talking to my loved ones and friends about stuttering a little bit more. And I started to notice a bit of physical change even from doing those sort of things as a byproduct. I was letting go of control, didn't know the verbiage yet, little by little myself, because I didn't need to keep myself so safe or concealed. But there came a point where, okay, my relationship with the identity component of stuttering had gotten, well, pretty okay. I mean, I would never say that I love stuttering. I'm always aiming to feel neutral about it.
Yeah.
And I would say I came to okay, we can coexist space. But was still feeling like I was experiencing each moment of stuttering, like, oh, okay, here it comes. What should I do? Oh, here it is again. And then I had the post-event rumination of, oh man, I did this, but. And that's when I kind of self-guided a little bit through arts, reading Sheehan, listening to you, and reading anything I could about arts. And I hadn't even really made contact with you yet, but just going down a path that felt right because I understood the paradoxical nature of the experience of stuttering, my intentionality or purpose, and I knew I needed more in that direction. So I kind of went on a soapbox, personal memory lane there. But
Yeah.
was that
No,
even answering your question?
no, but it's great because it brings up a whole range of other things too. So, what you're describing is that, and this is so common, not only for the person with a covert profile, but for anybody, where you're learning about, I loved the way you described it as curiosity. You're beginning to get curious about your stuttering, and that all of the rules that function with stuttering, all the paradoxes that function with stuttering, you get curious about it, about conflict, about concealment and effort to conceal, and why does self-disclosure help, and those kinds of things. But even though you're becoming curious and you're dipping into those things, there's still this very, very strong um, uh, self-stigma, which along with it comes the idea that I define my success as fluency.
Mhm.
And even though I can tell myself that it shouldn't be, and even though my clinician says there are other forms of success that you can look at, saying all you want to, when you want to, sharing space, connecting with others, saying, being a part of conversation, so many things. Very often, the person is defining their personal success in any moment as a little more successful the more fluent they are. And that's really hard to get rid of.
Mhm.
And so when you describe, when somebody starts moving into the realm of stutter affirming therapy and they buy in and they begin to change the way you so beautifully explained your change, you start to show more stuttering, and therefore you're battling your idea of success and failure. And we've talked about success and failure in previous episodes, but I think it's so central to the notion of buy-in, because when you're aligned with your idea of success and your change, it's easy to buy in. In other words, when you wanted chocolate ice cream and you bought the chocolate ice cream, then you feel much better. But when you're not getting what you wanted, it's a lot different. So I think that buy-in during the journey for so many of my clients begins to change, and they begin to doubt um, when they're starting to show stuttering that they don't want to show, and when they're starting to feel feelings they don't want to feel. And
Mhm.
oh my goodness, am I in too deep here? Um, and I don't want to scare people away, but there is that moment where you're all in,
Yep.
but I didn't buy in for this. In other words, this wasn't on my shopping list. I ended up with something in my cart I didn't want.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's really interesting too, as clinicians, navigating, which I'm more recently navigating that phase in people's journeys. Um, I intellectually wanted this.
Mhm.
I'm gung ho about the theory and the therapy. I get it and I want it. And I want to be like that person and that person and that person who's done really well with it. But
Mhm.
here I am in the middle of it, and I'm scared to death.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I like to think of it as imagining, those that like set of blocks that young kids play with, where there's a smaller block inside, and then the smaller block fits in the bigger block, and
Yeah,
then
yeah. Nesting.
it,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, I like to think about it as like a series of doors where we have these thresholds that we've set for ourselves of like, this is what I can tolerate right now, like that's too much in there. And it's like we shut the door and we identify where the door is, and we think about it like, all right, that door is not that helpful, but like that's where I'm at. I'd like to move past that door. We decide to open that door and cross that threshold, but then we do eventually hit another door. And it's sort of this like, how many boxes or doors are there until until relief, or really that rear view mirror you talk a lot about, which is part of this, because change is so incremental and small, hopefully, if it's done well in a sustainable way, that it doesn't whack you over the head like, oh yeah, all of a sudden today I've reached acceptance, or I've reached that joy of communication metric I set. And it's like sometimes you get in that slog of like, how many how many block boxes or blocks do I have, how many doors until the big door. um and I think that's why it's so important to meet other people, to see people a little bit ahead of you in this, but also to have those reflection points, those rear view mirror points where you really are taking stock. Like, yeah, I have made so many strides here. Um, because I think that increment, the point in time where you're starting to like be like, you know what, I liked that room that I was previously in. That was more comfortable. Can we go back there?
So Sarah, you remind me, I love that. Yeah, bargaining, you're at the bargaining, so it reminds me of the clients that I have who get to a point in there, you just really flash this. They get to a point in therapy and then they start the bargaining, sort of like I had one woman who said to me once, Vivian, I love arts. I'm resonating with it. I love reducing my escape behaviors. I feel really great about being open about who I am as a person who stutters. I'm really enjoying the connection in the group. I'd like to do everything, except I'd like to just sort of skip the part about open stuttering.
Mhm.
Is it possible to do the therapy and not do any open stuttering?
Mhm.
And it was one of those moments where I understood exactly what she was coming from. In other words, in other words, the hard part about it is actually getting out there and showing the stuttering. In other words, everything else is preparing you to do it. And so it's like you're in the next room with those doors, and it's like, I don't like this one. I'm going to go back into the other room for a while.
Mhm.
Um, but this might be a good time for me to share my slide. What do you think?
I think it's a great
So
time.
I'm going to share. So sometimes, and I think this is sort of a fun thing for the clinicians listening, because I often, when clients ask me about buy-in, and they often say, I'd like to do everything except this, you know. And of course, you can do whatever you want to do. It's your journey. But I think to demonstrate basically, um, if clinicians ask their clients what they want, it's not as if we don't care what the client wants. 100% we want to hear what the client wants, but do we want to hear it in a form of a fantasy menu or not? In other words, maybe we want to hear what they want based on their feelings and what will make them feel like authentic communicators and have joy in their life and their communication. So I'm going to share the fantasy menu just for fun here. So here's the slide. Can we see the slide? Yeah. Do we see it? The
I
buy-in slide?
can't see, I can't see all, there we go. Yep, can see.
Okay, can we see it? Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
So this is one of my favorite. This is humor, everybody. This is supposed to be funny. So it's buy-in and why I hate the term. So it's sort of like we're coming into our speech therapist that she has a bakery, you know, and it says, "Can I help you? What can I help you with in your stuttering journey?" And they have sort of this fantasy menu. So the first one would be number one on the menu is fluency with a side of self-disclosure. In other words, I would like to be fluent, so I want a fluency, but I'll do the self-disclosure piece because that makes sense to me. So the obvious contradiction here is that you're willing to say you stutter, but not show it. And that's one of our most common profiles of people in the journey where they're very good at self-disclosure, very good at advertising, but showing it not so much. Okay. So I think that's a sort of a fantasy menu. Number two, acceptance, but hold the overt stuttering. So in other words,
Ding,
that
ding,
one is
ding,
like,
ding, ding.
I'll accept myself as a person who stutters, and I will be in stuttering communities, and I'll talk about my stuttering. And but you know, I don't want to show open stuttering. I'll manage it. I'll use a tool. I'll suppress it. I'll couch it. I'll hold back with it, but I don't want to show open stuttering. That's the one where I'll have everything except the open stuttering. And the last one is like, I'd like strategies because I want to be able to appear fluent when I need to, because sometimes I'm in important settings where I have to be fluent. But I agree. I don't want to practice anything because, you know, I don't want to practice those strategies, but I want the strategies when I need them. Because practicing would like take a hit on my spontaneity. And so they want they want spontaneity, but they also want strategies, which to me are a little bit contradictory. So I guess this is my fun slide that I like to share these things with clients, just so we can have a little bit of a laugh over the outcomes that they're choosing. And with the idea that choosing fluency is like, again, a false choice, when they can choose something that is realistic, like comfortable disfluency or efficient communication, um, if they're talking about their speech. So again, I guess when we get to the buy-in situation, I think that I tend to end up having fun with it if it comes up in there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good way of putting it and actually placing it on the client and even clinicians truly. So I think clinicians sometimes struggle with that intentionality matching piece and understanding sometimes what they're expecting and wanting and the route they're getting to it is actually contradictory.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a really good discussion point.
I'd love your take on this question because this is one that I'm curious about every once in a while. So you teach also, just like I do. We teach students and we're teaching them about various ways of present various ways of learning about stuttering in general, defining stuttering, and also therapy. So when you think about your teaching, my my observation is that my graduate students completely get this notion of stutter-affirming therapy. When it's taught to them, it makes sense to them. They are excited about it. They have there's a place in their conceptual framework related to their work in other types of differences like autism or other communication differences, where being able to embrace a difference and live and reduce life impact and live well. Um, However, I find that things change when they start practicing, and then you start talking to people who are out in the field who are very much the opposite. Um, do you notice that too?
Yes. And then I get the emails. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you think happens over those years between studentdom and clinical
Yeah.
practice?
Yeah, maybe a variety of things. This is just taking a stab at it, but
Yeah.
I think that you you so much want to simplify what you're doing as clinicians because you are busy, you're learning and trying to, in most cases, needing to be a generalist and knowing a good bit about a lot of things. You have a heavy caseload, um, and you're looking for things that you can put together pretty quickly. And I think sometimes you're observing a supervisor or and you look to them as an expert in a lot of other areas and you're thinking, well, if they do stuttering this way with a worksheet and drilling strategies, then this, yeah, and I could do that pretty easily and stack it in my worksheet pile for the day of kid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. um, and then I think there's that element of stuttering where in the clinical room things that are new and novel. And when paired with that perfect storm of it being okay to stutter and having that speech therapy room effect, the attempts at control in that space, quote unquote, work. And there's this forgettingness of the paradoxical nature and the real world nature and the impact of shame and the impact of people's perception. That's sort of clouded a little bit because when you're seeing someone in front of you increase their over presentation of fluency and also get excited about it probably because the clients aren't really quite understanding that, it gets tempting. um and so I don't think it's like a direct intention, but maybe through immersive experience because that's what they're probably seeing. um what do you think? Was
Yeah.
I in the
I
ballpark?
agree with, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. And I also agree with the whole notion of how many clients do I have who stutter, spend some time on this, whether I become skilled at it or not. But what I see as the interesting parallel between the client and the therapist is that the initial interest and resonation with it, I resonate with this, stutter affirming, it makes sense. That happens initially with our clients, and also the students who are first learning about it. They love it. They can't wait to do it. Implementation is the barrier here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I see for the client, I really want to do this. I really want to embrace stuttering, but when I get out in the real world, I really want to conceal it. I really want to hide it. And for the clinician, it's I want to embrace stuttering affirming therapy, but when I get in the room with the client, I doubt my ability to do counseling required for this kind of approach. And so the fear of failing at counseling draws them back to doing a more concrete fluency type approach, where they could judge their success through the frequency of stuttering in their client.
Mhm.
And I think with the parallel with the client is that um, they've always measured their success as fluency,
Mhm.
and now they no longer have a way of measuring their success. And one of the most common questions I get from my clients is, how do I know if I'm doing well? How do I know if I'm making progress? Um, my answer of you'll see it in the rearview mirror doesn't satisfy all.
Mhm.
They want to know what that looks like and what that means. But for you and me and many other clinicians who practice stuttering affirming therapy, the frustration of teaching it well, and then you have time for this, Sarah, but I'm a lot older, but seeing it years later out in practice, very often people who are literally in my classes, I hate to say this out loud, um, basically throwing in the towel and acting like they never heard of the notion of stutter affirming therapy.
Mhm.
It's one of those curiosities I have, and it's sort of like the people who come for arts trainings are the people who are interested in either getting back into this or learning about this. Um, so there's such a gap there that I think we have to address at some point in time. Otherwise, it looks like they're not learning um, about stutter affirming therapy in their graduate programs. And granted, many are not. And I'm not going to ignore the fact that there are many programs who are not teaching it. There are many programs without a course in stuttering or without a dedicated course in stuttering.
Mhm.
People who are teaching the course that don't understand the lived experience of stuttering. All of those things still exist.
Mhm.
But there are many of us who are doing good teaching regarding therapy. And I don't think we see it reflected in the outside world yet,
Yeah.
just from graduate programs to clinical practice. And I think we need to do more about that.
Yeah. You explained that so well. I'm going to change my answer. No, I'm kidding. I agree. And it's challenging, right? I mean, it's it's something I'm still building skills for and continuing to learn and grow. And I think that's the reality. It's not the easiest route. And it does take immersion, and it takes a young new clinician to feel assured and firm in their underlying theoretical foundation and why. And that's tricky when you're new and you don't have a lot of clinical experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But my students who are listening, you will do better. No.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I guess maybe the last thing we can talk about here is just give some helpful hints to people. Like if you're a clinician and you want to start exploring the notion of stutter affirming therapy with your client without saying, would you like acceptance or would you like fluency? In other words, begin a conversation with your client to find out what they value.
Mhm.
How would we begin doing something like that? Because we both do this every day in our consults. Um, and from my perspective, um, I start out not by offering, this is what I can give you, but I
Mhm.
start out by listening to the client's story
Mhm.
and tell me about you and why you're here seeking help. What would you like help with? And allowing them to express what they want help with, even if they go to, well, if I didn't stutter, I'd be more confident. And if I didn't stutter, then I would have a better job. And if I didn't stutter, I'd probably have a really meaningful relationship in my life. And if I didn't stutter, then I would have less anxiety and stress on a daily basis. And I probably wouldn't have to see the mental health professional that I'm seeing on and on and on and on, the giant in chains. Um, but I think that allowing them to say, and if I didn't stutter, allow that sentence to be there and then go to what they're saying afterwards.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, yeah. So you're talking about anxiety. You're talking about wanting to improve your job position. You're talking about developing intimate relationships, and you feel that when you're inauthentic, you can't do that. There's so much information that the client is giving you that when you sort of take the fluency piece and allow it to be in the room, don't challenge it,
Yeah.
but allow it to be in the room and just place it on the side and allow it to be part of the conversation, but then begin to open, like you said so beautifully, open the other door and say, yeah, imagine spontaneity and communication. How would that affect an intimate relationship? Or imagine saying all you wanted to say when you wanted to say in a meeting. How would that impact a future promotion in your job? And then having the client come up with what they would like to change in their communication to be able to achieve the things that they want to. And I guess what I'm saying is, for me, it's not about saying, no, we don't work on fluency,
Mhm.
but embrace that notion of, for you, the only way to get to your goals is through fluency, and allow that to be in the space.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think the second that you reject what has brought someone to you initially, you sacrifice, like they're going through a whole process then. And I think we ultimately know what it is most people who stutter want, which is the outcomes of things being more comfortable and efficient and joyful, and to have a better sense of self and all those things. And I think when people are thinking and using fluency, I think a lot of times they're thinking all those things too. And so we don't need to be rejecting that or combative at that juncture in time. I think down the line, having an interesting conversation at different various junctures at different rooms, so different thresholds, that response and discussion might evolve. Um, and I would say I'm very similar, and I think exploring how they have coped with stuttering, I think that can be a really helpful conversation, because what I don't want them to walk away feeling is that they have been doing bad things or things that are wrong, right? I mean, it's challenging to be someone who stutters in a lot of spaces, and there's a lot of misinformation, and we've just developed a lot of things to keep ourselves safe from what we don't want to experience or feel.
Yeah.
So talk to me about coping, and if we need to get specific with some questions. And I think that's a really nice juncture to kind of tie in the vantage point of how we might look ahead together. And then to what degree depends on the timing. And also, you know, we I don't know if someone told me about what room 5 looks like when I was still in room 1, if I'd keep moving towards room 5. And so I think we balance what is necessary to see forward, but also not wanting to send somebody running out and looking for a whole new set of doors from somebody else and what they're selling, because that is out there in the case.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm going to kill that analogy. I think I've
No,
beat it
but
beat it till it's done.
I love the idea that coping is a healthy thing. I love that idea. And also, that um, guilt for not doing the best of avoidance reduction is also not a healthy thing. And I always say, don't be a hero. You know what I mean? There are times when you do want to use escape behaviors and you do want to avoid, and you need to protect yourself. You have to stay safe. And I like the reframing it of coping, because that allows people to understand why they're doing it and embrace that their need for doing that at any one particular time. So that's really helpful. I like that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like there's so many more things, that because I feel really, while I don't love this question either of buy-in, because I think it surfaces what is a really depthful necessary grasp on the theory and the process to adequately support and meet someone where they are. So I think that's maybe my qualm with it. I so do want to support people who might question, well, how do I navigate this buy-in, which really is how do I get someone who wants something, but I know that they'd be okay with this too, and the route, the direction there. How do I meet them where they are so that we can move through together? And I'm not going to say the rooms.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
analogy's done, but so I really hope that this was as comprehensive as we could be. And please, if anyone has questions, pop them in the comments, because I think that would be helpful for us to be able to loop back to some things. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And just to add that notion of the gradual shift in the process of therapy, the gradual change and shifting of what we call buy-in, or what others call buy-in, um, is really about changing your idea of success. And at the beginning, it's the success you want to have, and then very gradually changing your private idea of what success is, which stays as fluency for a really, really long time. And I want people to understand that that's okay.
That's okay. And
That's
to
okay.
know, ultimately, to understand that there's a lot of unwanted feelings, negative feelings of shame and fear and guilt and embarrassment that are going to be felt, hopefully intentionally and planned for productively along the way. And so it validating, especially if there's clinicians listening, that there are going to be sessions where, it feels icky. It's not like roses and rainbows of how, yeah, this week it was great. I felt great. And I did all the things and I was confident, right? And so ultimately the journey we're on is to support people to to avoid and fear stuttering less, so that it doesn't have such a stronghold and take the power back from it. To do that, you got to show it you're not afraid of it. And to do that, you got to face what you don't want to face. And so here we are supporting, and it's not always easy. And so really understanding and validating that for clinicians too, and people who stutter.
Yeah. I love that, Sarah. And you got the last word on that. Okay.
Ooh, I
Ooh,
like it.
a sip of coffee.
Haven't, yeah, this is, I'm far too caffeinated today. So I think, I think my box analogy went, um, but it's always such a joy to chat stuttering. Uh, again, I look up to you so much, and I've learned so much about stuttering from you, and getting a chance to talk shop and to hit record and to really get into it. We don't plan these, everyone. We're sort of like email a topic and then we're like, well, let's see where it goes.
Yeah.
Um, it's so fun and I'm really appreciative. So thank you.
Yeah. And Sarah, thank you for being my buddy, my coffee buddy, and my conversation buddy about all things stuttering. And let's hope that we hit record this time. Yeah.
Oh, I really hope.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.